We all know of the disappointment that was Cyberpunk 2077. And hopefully we've learned our lesson not to trust CD Projekt Red anymore, or any company that claims to be the champion of the consumer. Because it's a lie, it's always been a lie. But once upon a time, CD Projekt Red truly was essentially an indie company, even if they had significantly higher budget than most other studios. And you could tell they truly cared about the products they were creating. And of course their very first game was The Witcher 1. And so this game is roughly 13 years old. So how good is it really? Has it aged well? Is it one of those classic RPGs that just has an awesome story, even if certain other elements have aged poorly? Well, let's find out. But before we do, I just want to take a second of your time to explain to you what you've heard a million times about engagement on this website, which is essentially, you know, when I say do what the algorithm likes, I mean liking or disliking and commenting, and specifically those things in combination. I don't need to explain this in detail, and you can look up a video if you want. So if you could please do that. I don't even care if you hate the video. If you do, dislike it and comment. That still helps, I guess. Though I suppose you wouldn't want to help me if you hate the video. And of course, this is another Patreon video. I haven't done one of these in a while, but I'll probably be doing them more frequently from here on out. Thank you to Aridin, a very fitting name. I can see why you requested this game, for donating to my Patreon and making this video possible. And if you'd like your own video like this, check out my Patreon in the description. Alright, so without further ado, let's talk about The Witcher 1. So this game has been very difficult for me to review because I haven't felt this conflicted about a game in a long time. I mean, even more so than, say, Doom Eternal. Because The Witcher is a deeply, deeply flawed game. But it has an excellent story, characters, dialogue. Just the writing overall is just as interesting as The Witcher 3. And in some ways, it is better than The Witcher 3. But combat, which you're going to be spending a significant amount of the game doing, is one of the worst combat systems I've ever experienced in a game. It is laughably bad. Or at least I wish I could say laughably. It's actually painfully bad. Words can't effectively describe how shitty it is. It is so poorly designed. If you took an MMO's combat system or Xenoblade Chronicles or something like that, but you took away all of the abilities and made it so you had to manually click every time you auto-attack. It's horrible. It's so bad. And I don't want to waste too much time on this review talking about how bad it is, because at the end of the day, if you're here to play like a classic RPG with a great story and characters, and you've never cared about how boring turn-based combat was in most old JRPGs, you could probably stomach your way through this, but I honestly would have preferred a turn-based combat system to this. Turn-based would have been so much better. Now, where do I even begin with this? Well, basically how it works is you click on an enemy, it does an animation, then Geralt twirls his sword, and while he's twirling his sword, you click again to do the next hit in the combo. And at the very beginning of the game, you don't even have like your secondary combo moves. So it's just the same animation slightly faster for like 5 times in a row. And it just feels really terrible. Because there's actually some weird input lag that's inconsistent that happens that alters the timing of when you're supposed to click again. And most of the time this isn't a problem, but it is when you combine it with certain other potions and also enemies that hit you. Because believe it or not, enemies can interrupt your combos, and enemies hit you even when they don't do an animation to hit you. So while you're comboing an enemy, they don't attack you on your screen from what you see, but you can still take damage because they're still attacking you because it's their turn. So it's like a pseudo turn-based combat in that sense. And it just looks ridiculous and feels horrible. And when you combine this with the Blizzard potion, which is one of the best potions in the game, it essentially slows down time and makes it so you dodge attacks twice as frequently. The problem is it also doubles your input lag. Like, I don't even know how to explain it really, except that I fucked it up a million times when it shouldn't have been my fault. It was just, the game just felt so clunky the way that it handled it. And so 90% of the complexity in the combat just comes from preparation. Because you're not going to want to be drinking your potions in the middle of the combat, trust me. You're going to get your ass handed to you. So you're chugging all these potions, rubbing your oils on swords and shit, which all should sound familiar if you played Witcher 3. And occasionally you cast signs. Now, the thing with signs is, and I can't say if this was really meta in Witcher 3, but I remember the first time I played it, I basically did the same thing I did in this game, which is that I only leveled 2 of the signs, because I only really used 2 for the entire game. And it's the same exact moves from Witcher 3. You shoot fire, you force push, you put a shield around yourself, you can mind control enemies, and you can place traps on the ground. The problem is that you've only got a select number of skill points every time you level up, so you're just going to pick whatever ones you like the most, and you get Ard and Igni early on, so you're more likely to level up those ones, which is exactly what I did. Especially since Ard, aka Force Push, can stun enemies, and if an enemy is stunned, you can instantly kill them, including some bosses, which we'll get into later. And then Igni just does a shit ton of damage because you shoot fire. I didn't bother with the other 3. Quen was heavily nerfed, or I guess the opposite of nerf. It was heavily buffed in Witcher 3, because in Witcher 1, Quen dissipates as soon as you attack. So yeah, it's really only good for buffing. And so we get into the crux of the problem, which this was my own fault. I played this game on hard, which I've got to stop doing that, but generally I like if I pick a harder difficulty and then just lower the difficulty if it gets too hard later. The problem is this game's difficulty is not even slightly balanced. It's so bad in the early game, and in the mid game it's not so bad. It's not too bad, but when you're in the outskirts of Vizima, it's broken. You get killed in like 5 hits from everything. And there's almost no way to level grind because you get most of your EXP in this game by completing quests. Monsters don't give you shit. Yeah, and the thing with the difficulty is you can't lower it. At one point, I just said, fuck it, I'm not going to play on hard anymore. And guess what? You can't lower the difficulty. So, yep. I kind of did it to myself. But still, fuck this game. So I actually got stuck at like the first major boss fight right at the end of chapter 1. And oh my god, it was so painful. I lost so much time. So this first boss is a hellhound, right? And he summons all these little other green hounds to help him out. The thing is, he kills you in like 4 hits, 4 or 5. If you attack him, he paralyzes you with fear. And guess what? 2/3 of the enemies in this game have a stun move. And there's nothing you can do to prevent it except drink a potion, which makes you immune to it. And guess what? I didn't have the formula for that potion yet. And so every time I hit him, I got paralyzed by pain. And so he could beat my ass more into the ground with nothing that I could do about it. And they give you a healer during this fight, right? She dies in like the first 5 seconds, unless you kill the green wolves, because they go straight for her. And so I was stuck on this for so long, because technically there are ways to beat it. Like, one way is if you get the skill that makes you immune to pain while you're drunk, you can quickly get drunk during the battle, which is not as quick as you would think. You have to drink like 3 medium strength alcohols or some shit, which just sounds weird to say, essentially like 3 wine bottles. And so yeah, I legitimately tried that once. The problem is when you're drunk, your hit accuracy is reduced. So even though I wasn't being stunned by pain, he was still beating my ass because I couldn't even hit him. And so I tried like all these other methods. Finally, how I beat him is through an instant kill from Ard. Like, what a fucking anticlimax after all that. And yeah, the combat never really got better. I mean, you unlock some new combo moves, You can charge up spells, which actually is basically useless. And, you know, you learn new potions, you eventually get to use bombs. And, yeah, I mean, that's about it. So, I guess to get to the thing that you guys are really here for, if you're actually interested in this game, how good is the story and characters? Well, like I said, it's great, actually. It's really good. There are some issues. Voice acting, mainly, is very inconsistent. Some characters just, like, are monotone, and not in a good way, not in, like, a Geralt way, where the Witcher's is supposed to be somewhat emotionless. No, Triss, ironically, her voice actress is fucking horrible, dude. She does not even try.
The professor is wanted in Redania, Temeria, and Kedwin. A real maggot. A real maggot.
A real maggot.
And, like, there are some good voices in here, but even, like, Geralt's voice, he just doesn't sound trained yet. And I think he's the only voice that's been the same across all 3 games. Pretty much everyone here was recast over the course of the trilogy. Also, I know this game came out in 2007, but some of these character models are fucking hideous. Zoltan looks goddamn horrifying. Oh my god.
Yeah, drunk. I'm your pal, Zoltan Cherry.
Which is weird because, like, the other default dwarf model looks fine. Also, you can tell, like, some of the characters were heavily redesigned. Like, Dandelion looks a lot more, I don't know, plain and generic in this one. And so to actually get into the story, basically, you have amnesia. And I already don't like that. And it's used throughout basically the entire game. Amnesia stories are just not that interesting. But I guess they needed an excuse to start Geralt at level 1 and have no skills or whatever. Or maybe this is a plot point in one of the books. But essentially, he died and disappeared, and somehow he came back. And so, basically, right after he comes back to Kaer Morhen, the home of the Wolf School of Witchers, the place gets attacked by this evil wizard guy and his lackey professor dude.
A real maggot.
And you find out about this evil cult called Salamandra, who apparently wants to bring back the Witchers, make some new ones, or do some other weird shit. And so you stop the invaders, but they teleport away, of course. And so you gotta track them down. And so all the Witchers split up, and of course where Geralt goes is the right way to go. He goes to Temeria, specifically to its capital, Vizima, and you've got to investigate and take out the Salamandra cult, while also hopefully getting your memory back. And the game has some interesting twists and turns. I won't spoil everything here, but there are some major plot twists. There's some really solid side quests, actually, you know, just like Witcher 3. And your choices actually do matter. Like, you will make some choices that affect the story significantly. The main decision in the story is choosing whether you want to side with the Knights of the Flaming Rose or the Scoia'tael, non-human, terroristy type of people. And honestly, saying it like that kind of makes it sound like an obvious choice. But there's also the third option of neutrality, which, if you've played Witcher 3, you probably know which one of those is the correct option. But it is interesting that you actually can get 3 different endings, depending on who you side with. One of the side quests I liked was this knight guy was searching for his sister, right? Who had been bitten by a vampire, or so he says. And her most notable thing is having blue eyes, which is kind of weird that nobody has blue eyes. But of course, if you are exploring the trade quarter of Vizima, you see that there's a blue-eyed maiden in the whorehouse. And so you try to convince him, yeah, dude, she had bite marks on her neck. That's your sister, bro. And he's like, no, she must be controlled by a vampire. So go fucking check it out. And so you go check it out, and he's technically correct, but he's also wrong at the same time. As the sister was going to be in an arranged marriage, and apparently she was treated like shit, supposedly. And so she willingly decided to become a vampire. And basically the entire whorehouse is a whorehouse of vampires. And Geralt, from his past life, actually knows the head vampire lady. And so you gotta choose if you're gonna vanquish the vampires, doing your duty as a witcher to kill monsters, or if you choose what you believe to be the morally correct position, or you could just side with them because you want to sleep with them.
Come, dear daughters. Time to show the Witcher the source of all legends about the House of the Night.
Or actually, there's even a neutral option where you can sleep with them and then just walk away, which is definitely kind of a fucked option. But speaking of Geralt's promiscuity, which people probably know by now, he sleeps with everybody. And I mean everybody. In this game, Geralt collects women like fucking Yu-Gi-Oh cards, dude.
Hey, Joey! Earth to Joey! Hey, are you in there? It's your turn.
So I found that pretty amusing, that you can sort of min-max sleeping with as many women as possible. Especially since the game gives you an opportunity to whether you want to pledge yourself to Shani or Triss, which of course I picked Triss because I barely even knew who Shani was since she wasn't in Witcher 3, at least I don't remember her being in Witcher 3. And so, yeah, Triss is obviously the better option, even though she looks a lot hotter in 3, but yeah, you know, graphics, I guess. One thing that's really grabbed a lot of people over time is the Witcher universe itself. Because it's sort of a realistic dark fantasy universe with just enough fantasy elements to keep it interesting without going like Game of Thrones, where it's essentially just an alternate real world with, you know, White Walkers and dragons being some of the only fucking fantasy elements. No, the Witcher universe is actually fairly high fantasy if you were to take it at face value. But because of the nature of the universe, which is that the world had no magic in it until this huge like convergence event where alternate realities entered our world, right? That sort of gives it this way more grounded and realistic portrayal of traditional fantasy monsters and races. And they really delve into what would happen if all of a sudden elves, dwarves, gnomes, etc. just entered our world just one day. Obviously, there's a lot of racial tension, and that's a major theme of this game, as the Scoia'tael are essentially the quote-unquote freedom fighters or terrorists, depending on how you view it. And they legitimately murder people, just like supposed real-world non-violent organizations, not naming any names. And this ties into the good writing and dialogue, which admittedly probably oversteps its bounds a little bit, as this is supposed to be the 13th century, and yet they have 20th century psychology terms, like cognitive dissonance, used in dialogue. So, you know, it's not all realistic, but I suppose it's better than having generic medieval fantasy dialect, with thy, thine, forsooth, all those quirky, goofy terms. But honestly, some of the philosophical moments come across as pretty deep, and not in like a cringy 14-year-old sort of way.
The right of Witchers to live and function in this world has fallen out of balance, because the struggle between good and evil now plays out on a different battlefield with different rules. Evil has ceased being chaotic. No longer a blind elemental power, evil follows rules according to the rights it's been granted. It functions in line with treaties.
War has changed.
That's progress. With more of us living longer, we can slaughter one another in the thousands. Progress is like a herd of pigs. The herd brings many benefits, but no one should wonder at all the shit.
Shit or no shit, Witchers exist to slay monsters. How can I when the real monsters hide behind ideals, faith, or the law?
The biggest evil is moral relativity, which kills more than the Catriona Plague and dragons combined.
Despite the high fantasy elements, it is a low magic setting, which is probably for the best, because higher magic settings always raise too many questions. You know, if anyone can cast a spell, then wizards would pretty much dominate the world, right? But no, when it's just a select number of sorceresses and druids and a few wizards here and there, they have their proper place in society. And anyone who has played these games or read any of the books knows that the sorceresses are often advisors to kings and stuff like that. So they can't just solve all of the world's problems by themselves when there's only like 10 of them. If I did have to have a major complaint about the story of this game, it would be the pacing. And this sort of combines with the gameplay, because they're definitely intertwined. Because first of all, this game doesn't have fast travel. Yes, no fast travel. You actually have to jog everywhere. There are a few teleporters, but they barely count as shortcuts. The only good one is there's one to the swamp, which is pretty far from, like, the Vizima's temple quarter. But other than that, like, the other two teleports didn't even matter, really. So, yes, you're going to be doing a shit ton of running, a shit ton of talking to people, a shit ton of shifting from day to night. That was a really annoying thing. That there's a lot of time-based events in this game. You've got to rest from night to day to day to night to night to day, you know, over and over again. It's very, very obnoxious, but you do it for the quests. And this is one thing I will spoil, because it's not really a huge story spoiler, but I particularly liked that you meet this guy, Vincent Mays, who works with the guards in Vizima, right? And he helps you with this investigation of tracking down Salamandra. And it turns out the guy was a werewolf the whole time, and he's been using his werewolf powers to actually fight crime. He's a werewolf vigilante. And you can choose whether or not you want to kill him, but why would you kill him? And if you don't kill him, he actually helps you out later. And you can choose whether or not you want to cure him, which of course affects if he helps you at that point. I didn't cure him, so I had a werewolf buddy help me fight a bunch of dudes, and it was a really cool little rewarding moment. But back to the pacing. On top of having to run back and forth everywhere, the game has this weird, like, habit of escalating events, and then after those events are over, it de-escalates. And the problem is you can't do that. And you definitely can't do that more than once if you do it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the typical 3-act structure that's been used for most of human history, right? It's done for a reason. So when I got to the end of chapter 3, and basically you get teleported out of danger, to not spoil anything, basically the game goes back to outskirts of a Vizima type of scale, essentially. Because, like, instead of being out in these farmlands, you're in, like, this murky lakeside, and it's villages again. It's like, you can't de-escalate shit. You just can't. I already know what the stakes are, and it's cool that, you know, Geralt got out of danger and all that, but you need to take me right back into the action. I don't want to waste another 5 to 10 hours doing side quests for villagers who I don't give a shit about. But that's what the game does. And so, I guess to wrap this up, is it worth playing? Only if you like classic RPGs. I hate to say it, but if you don't, you already knew that when I went over the combat section. If you watch this combat in this video, does that look fun? No, it's not. It's even less fun than it looks. It's basically just buffing yourself as much as possible and then clicking every few seconds. That's the whole thing. And sometimes you change combat styles to attack enemies in a group, or attack faster or attack slower enemies. Pulling out your silver sword, pulling out your steel sword. That's all there is. It's horrible. So of course you're playing this for the story, and for most people, a good story is not good enough. The gameplay has to meet a certain standard, and this doesn't meet any standards, really, of quality. And this is something apparently CD Projekt Red has always struggled with, because Witcher 3's combat was just okay, and Cyberpunk's gunplay was decent at best. And so yeah, I mean, if you want a quality story that's really slow paced over the course of roughly 40 to 50 hours, depending on how many side quests you do, this is a pretty good game. But yeah, if you want to play an action game, or at least have some kind of strategic combat that requires thinking and planning, this isn't going to meet those standards. But honestly, for CD Projekt Red's first game, it's certainly pretty good. I can excuse some things. And so it'll be interesting to check out if Witcher 2 actually improves on these principles, or if it goes like full Witcher 3. I honestly have no idea. I've never played it, but it'll be interesting to check out in the future. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you haven't already, do the things the algorithm likes that I explained before. Check out my Patreon if you want to support me directly. Every bit counts. Thank you to all my patrons. It's thanks to you that this video is possible, and definitely makes it so a small channel like me has some will to keep going. And yeah, I mean, I guess other than that, I finally started playing Far Cry 2. It's definitely different. I didn't quite expect this. It's fun though, so far. I actually really like the weapon durability mechanic, and I'm surprised that I do like it, but it adds a little interesting mechanic in there to keep things interesting and challenging. I also really like having to manually look at your map, surprisingly. That's another thing. I was like, yeah, no, I thought that might be annoying. No, it's actually pretty cool. It's actually better than like pulling up a map menu. Other than that, I'm excited for some games I'm going to cover in the next couple weeks, because the next Binding of Isaac expansion's coming out soonish, couple weeks. So I'll definitely be covering that for the channel, whether or not anybody wants to see it. I don't care. I really like Binding of Isaac. And then just a few days after that is Outriders. I'll do a full review on that. And I think that pretty much covers things. I'm not sure if I'll actually do Far Cry 2 next. I might actually do Ratchet & Clank. I'm not sure. I'll think about it. Either way, I'll see you next time, guys.